Terrified and trapped inside her dark closet, she prayed for the police as she hastily texted an emergency number. Her plus-sized frame trembled when she hit send. But the men who shattered her front door minutes later didn't carry badges. They wore bespoke Italian suits and wielded suppressed lethal weapons. Rain lashed against the cracked window pane of apartment 4B, masking the sound of Madeline's ragged breathing. Madeline Hayes pressed her back flush against the cold drywall of her bedroom closet, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth. She was a woman of generous proportions, and in this terrifying moment, her lush, plus-sized frame felt like a heavy liability. Wedging her wide hips and soft, thick thighs behind a heavy rack of winter coats had been an agonizing struggle, her broad shoulders scraping against the doorframe. Now curled into a tight, trembling ball, she squeezed her eyes shut as the unmistakable sound of shattering wood echoed from her living room. Kyle was inside. "Maddie!" His voice was a guttural roar, slurred with cheap whiskey and blind rage. "Maddie, you fat, stupid cow! Where are you hiding? You actually thought locking the deadbolt would keep me out?" Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, a hot tear slipping down her flushed cheek. Kyle Henderson, her violently abusive ex-boyfriend, had just made bail. He had sworn he would kill her if she ever went to the cops again, and Kyle was a man who kept his ugly promises. He had a heavy steel crowbar. She had heard it smash through the deadbolt. Worse, she knew he carried an illegal Glock 9 tucked into the waistband of his faded denim jeans. Frantic Madeline fumbled in the dark for her cell phone. The screen's glare felt as bright as a spotlight, so she quickly dimmed it to the lowest setting. Her hands were shaking so violently, she nearly dropped the device into a pile of discarded shoes. She couldn't call 911. If she spoke, Kyle would hear her instantly. The walls of her cheap Chicago walk-up were paper-thin. Instead, she opened her text messages. Her brother's best friend, Officer Liam Peterson, worked dispatch at the 12th District Precinct just 3 blocks away. Liam had given her a direct emergency SMS line months ago when Kyle first started stalking her. "Memorize it," Maddie, Liam had told her. 312 or 8. If he ever shows up and you can't speak, text that number. Her thumbs hovered over the digital keyboard, slippery with cold sweat. She typed the number from memory. 3, 1, 2, 5, 5, 5, 0, 1, 8, 9. In her blind panic, she missed the final 8, her thumb slipping a fraction of an inch to the right, striking the 9 instead. Completely unaware of the fatal error, Madeline frantically typed her message. To 312, 555, 0189. "Liam, please help me. It's Maddie. Kyle broke into my apartment. He has a gun. I'm hiding in the bedroom closet." She hit send. Outside the bedroom, the heavy thud of Kyle's steel-toed boots grew louder. He was overturning furniture in the living room. The sickening crash of her glass coffee table shattering made Madeline flinch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her phone buzzed in her palm. A reply. From 312 5555 1089. Who is this? Madeline's chest tightened in confusion. Why was Liam asking that? Didn't he have her number saved? Or maybe it was a different dispatcher on shift? She didn't have time to care. She just needed them to send a squad car immediately. To 312 or 555 0189. Madeline Hayes, 42B Elm Street, South Loop, 4th floor. He said he's going to kill me. Please, hurry. Seconds ticked by. They felt like hours. The doorknob to her bedroom rattled violently, followed by the heavy impact of a shoulder slamming against the wood. Madeline let out a muffled whimper, pressing her face into a wool coat to stifle the sound. From 312 0555 Stay quiet. Do not move. Relief washed over her in a tidal wave. The police were coming. She just had to survive the next few minutes. She just had to stay hidden. "Found your little hideout, Maddie." Kyle sneered from the bedroom. He had kicked the door open. His heavy footsteps crossed the cheap carpet, stopping directly in front of the louvered closet doors. "You always were too big to hide properly." Madeline stopped breathing. Suddenly the closet doors were violently ripped open, the flimsy wood splintering off the tracks. The overhead bedroom light poured in, blinding her. Before she could scream, Kyle reached down his large, rough hands, grabbing the collar of her shirt and her thick, curly hair. With a vicious yank, he dragged her out of the closet. Madeline hit the bedroom floor hard, the impact, knocking the wind out of her lungs. Her phone skittered across the carpet, sliding under the bed. She scrambled backward, her hands slipping on the rug, her chest heaving, as she stared up at the man who had turned her life into a living nightmare. Kyle stood over her, his eyes wild and bloodshot, the heavy crowbar dripping with rainwater in his left hand. With his right hand, he pulled the black Glock from his waistband and pointed it directly at her face. "Look at you." Kyle spat, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He kicked her hard in the thigh, making her cry out in pain. Pathetic, crying on the floor like a stuck pig. "I told you what would happen if you put a restraining order on me, Maddie. I told you I'd put you in the ground." "Kyle, please," Madeline begged, her voice cracking as she held her hands up defensively, her large frame shaking uncontrollably. "The police are on their way. If you leave now—" Kyle threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that chilled her to the bone. "The cops, by the time those lazy badge-wearing idiots get up 4 flights of stairs, I'll be gone and you'll be bleeding out on this ugly carpet." He cocked the gun, the metallic click echoing loudly in the small room. Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the burning impact of a bullet, praying the dispatcher on the other end of the phone had sent someone fast enough. Down on the street below, the screeching of high-performance tires shattered the quiet of the rainy night. But there were no police sirens. Cigar smoke hung thick in the air of the underground VIP lounge at the Obsidian, one of Chicago's most exclusive and illicit poker clubs. Lorenzo Moretti sat at the head of a mahogany table, a tumbler of neat bourbon in one hand and a royal flush in the other. He was a man carved from marble, and violence with sharp Italian features. Eyes the color of storm clouds, and a tailored Tom Ford suit that hid the lethal muscle beneath. As the undisputed head of the Moretti crime syndicate, Lorenzo did not deal with street-level thugs. He dealt in millions in politicians and in absolute, unquestionable power. His underboss, Matteo Rossi, stood by the door, arms crossed, his gaze constantly sweeping the room. Suddenly, a sharp buzz vibrated against Lorenzo's chest. He frowned, setting his glass down. It was his burner phone, a heavily encrypted line, known only to his highest-ranking captains and a select few cartel contacts in Mexico. If that phone was buzzing, it meant millions of dollars were at stake, or someone was dead. He pulled the device from his inner pocket and opened the text. Unknown number. "Liam, please help me. It's Maddie. Kyle broke into my apartment. He has a gun. I'm hiding in the bedroom closet." Lorenzo's dark brows furrowed. Liam Maddie. This was a wrong number. Annoyed, he tapped out a quick reply to confirm the error, fully intending to block the number immediately afterward. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, carrying a wave of raw, unfiltered panic that transcended the digital screen. Unknown number. Madeline Hayes, 422B, Elm Street, South Loop, 4th floor. He said he's going to kill me. Please hurry. Lorenzo stared at the screen. Elm Street was exactly 2 blocks away from the Obsidian. It was squarely inside Moretti territory. A random woman was being hunted in her own home by a man with a gun right in his backyard, and she had accidentally texted the most dangerous man in the city instead of the police. Logic dictated he ignore it. It was a domestic dispute, a civilian problem, but Lorenzo was a man built on control and a twisted code of honor. He ruled the South Loop. No one fired a weapon in his district without his permission, and he had a deep-seated violent disgust for men who terrorized defenseless women. "Stay quiet," Lorenzo typed back rapidly. "Do not move." He stood up abruptly, the heavy wooden chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. The other men at the poker table froze, sensing the immediate shift in the room's atmosphere. "Matteo." Lorenzo barked, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "Get the car. Bring the suppressed weapons." Matteo didn't ask questions. He merely nodded, unbuttoning his suit jacket to reveal the dual holsters at his ribs. "Where are we going, boss?" "Elm Street, 2 blocks down," Lorenzo said, striding toward the exit with predatory grace. "Some punk named Kyle is causing a disturbance in my territory. We're going to teach him some manners." Less than 3 minutes later, 2 black armored SUVs skidded to a halt outside the decaying apartment building on Elm Street. The rain was coming down in sheets, but Lorenzo didn't flinch as he stepped out into the storm. He drew his customized 1911 pistol, screwing the heavy black silencer onto the barrel with practiced, terrifying efficiency. Matteo and 2 other heavily armed enforcers flanked him as they entered the building. They bypassed the broken elevator, taking the concrete stairs 2 at a time, moving with absolute silence despite their size. When they reached the 4th floor, the door to apartment 4B was already hanging off its hinges, the wood splintered and ruined. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He motioned for his men to fan out, stepping lightly over the threshold into the wrecked living room. From down the narrow hallway, Lorenzo heard a man's voice, dripping with cruel arrogance. "The cops. By the time those lazy badge-wearing idiots get up 4 flights of stairs, I'll be gone, and you'll be bleeding out on this ugly carpet." The metallic click of a gun being cocked echoed through the apartment. Lorenzo moved like a ghost. He stepped into the doorway of the bedroom, his storm cloud eyes taking in the scene in a fraction of a second. A scrawny, wild-eyed man in cheap jeans stood over a woman cowering on the floor, pointing a Glock at her face. The woman Madeline stole Lorenzo's breath for a microsecond. She was on the floor, weeping, her clothes disheveled. She was not the stick-thin, heavily Botoxed socialites he was used to entertaining. She was wonderfully thick, with soft, generous curves, full thighs, and a plush, terrified face framed by a chaotic halo of dark curls. Even trembling in mortal terror, there was something devastatingly beautiful about the way she looked up at the gun, her soft features braced for a violent end. Lorenzo felt a sudden, violently possessive fury ignite in his chest. "I think," Lorenzo said, his smooth, heavily accented voice cutting through the bedroom like a blade of ice, "you are vastly underestimating the response time in this neighborhood." Kyle spun around, his eyes widening in shock as he registered the towering, immaculate figure standing in the doorway. He didn't see police uniforms. He saw a man in a bespoke suit, holding a suppressed weapon, flanked by 2 giants, who looked like they killed people for sport. "Who the hell are you?" Kyle demanded, his gun wavering as he tried to aim it at Lorenzo. "Get the hell out of here. This ain't your business." Lorenzo didn't even blink. He raised his 1911 and pulled the trigger. Pfft! The suppressed gunshot was barely louder than a cough, but the impact was devastating. The bullet shattered Kyle's right kneecap. Kyle screamed a high-pitched sound of absolute agony, dropping the Glock as his leg buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the carpet, clutching his ruined knee, writhing and sobbing in a pool of his own blood. Madeline shrieked, scrambling backward until her back hit the base of her mattress, her wide, tear-filled eyes darting from her screaming ex-boyfriend to the strangers standing in her doorway. Lorenzo walked into the room slowly, his leather shoes avoiding the growing pool of blood. He kicked Kyle's dropped gun across the room, where Matteo calmly picked it up and tucked it into his belt. "Shut him up!" Lorenzo ordered coldly, not taking his eyes off Madeline. Matteo stepped forward and delivered a swift, brutal kick to Kyle's jaw. The crack of bone echoed loudly, and Kyle slumped to the floor unconscious and instantly silenced. The bedroom was dead quiet, save for the sound of the rain outside and Madeline's frantic hyperventilating breaths. She pressed her hands to her mouth, staring up at Lorenzo with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. These weren't the police. Liam hadn't sent them. These men were mobsters. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and slowly knelt in front of her. Up close, the sheer size of him was intimidating, but his movements were surprisingly gentle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his burner phone, turning the screen around so she could see the text messages she had sent just 10 minutes ago. "You have terrible aim, Madeline Hayes," Lorenzo said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You missed the 8. Madeline stared at the screen, the realization washing over her in a wave of cold shock. You got my text," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at the expensive suit, the blood on the floor, and back to his striking face. Who are you?" A slow, dangerous smile curved Lorenzo's lips. He reached out his warm, calloused thumb, gently wiping a stray tear from her plump cheek. The contrast of his lethal hands against her soft skin sent a violent shiver down her spine. "I'm the man who arrived instead of the police," Lorenzo murmured, his gaze dropping to her full trembling lips before meeting her eyes again. "My name is Lorenzo Moretti, and from the looks of it, Tesoro, you need a better class of protection." The sheer absurdity of the situation paralyzed Madeline. She remained frozen against the base of her mattress, her wide eyes darting from the unconscious, bleeding form of her violently abusive ex-boyfriend to the towering, immaculate mob boss kneeling before her. Lorenzo Moretti's name carried heavy, terrifying weight in Chicago. Even a civilian like Madeline, who spent her days working quietly as an archivist at the public library, knew the whispers about the Moretti family. They controlled the ports, the underground casinos, and half the politicians in the state. Yet the man gazing down at her didn't look like a monster. He looked like a dark, avenging angel who had descended into her personal hell to pull her from the fire. "I need you to breathe, Tesoro." Lorenzo commanded his voice, a low rumbling vibration that sent unexpected warmth flooding through her shivering limbs. He reached forward, moving with deliberate slowness so as not to startle her, and draped his heavy, custom-tailored suit jacket over her trembling shoulders. The silk lining was still warm from his body, smelling deeply of expensive Tom Ford Old Wood cologne rain and the sharp metallic tang of recently discharged gunpowder. "Matteo," Lorenzo said, not breaking eye contact with Madeline. "Clean up this mess. I want this trash taken to the warehouse on the docks. See what else he has to say before you dispose of him. Have the cleaners scrub this apartment. I do not want a single drop of his miserable blood remaining on this floor." "Consider it done, boss," Matteo replied, his massive hands effortlessly gripping Kyle by the collar of his cheap shirt. He dragged the unconscious bleeding man out of the bedroom as easily as if he were carrying a bag of discarded laundry, leaving a grim trail of crimson across the ugly beige carpet. Lorenzo stood towering over Madeline. He offered her his hand, a large, calloused palm that promised absolute protection. Madeline hesitated. She was acutely aware of her body, of the soft, generous curves of her thick thighs, and her plush stomach pushing against the fabric of her torn pajamas. For years, Kyle had systematically destroyed her self-esteem branding her weight as a disgusting flaw, a heavy burden that made her unworthy of genuine affection. She looked at Lorenzo's outstretched hand, and then up at his chiseled, striking face, expecting to see a flicker of the same disgust she had endured for years. Instead, she saw only intense, unwavering heat and absolute reverence. With a shaky breath, Madeline placed her small, soft hand into his. Lorenzo gripped her firmly and pulled her to her feet with shocking ease, as if her generous weight meant absolutely nothing to him. When her knees buckled from the fading adrenaline, he caught her instantly, his strong arm wrapping around her thick waist, anchoring her firmly against his solid, muscular side. "I have you," Lorenzo murmured against her dark curls. "You are safe now, Madeline. No one will ever lay a hand on you in anger again. I swear it on my life." 10 minutes later, Madeline found herself seated in the back of a heavily armored, pitch-black Maybach, parked on the rain-slicked pavement of Elm Street. The plush leather seats felt like a different universe compared to her run-down apartment. As the luxury vehicle glided smoothly through the neon-lit streets of downtown Chicago, Madeline instinctively tried to press herself into the far corner of the spacious cabin, attempting to make her large frame appear as small and unobtrusive as possible. Lorenzo, sitting beside her with a fresh tumbler of amber whiskey from the car's built-in console, noticed her withdrawal immediately. His storm-cloud eyes darkened. He reached across the wide leather expanse, gently grasping her soft, plump thigh, and firmly pulled her toward the center of the seat until her side was pressed intimately against his. "Do not shrink yourself in my presence, Madeline," Lorenzo commanded softly, his thumb rubbing soothing circles into the fabric covering her knee. "You have a beautiful, magnificent form. Do not hide it. You take up exactly the amount of space in this world that you are meant to." Madeline's breath hitched a fresh wave of hot tears prickling her eyes. The raw sincerity in his deep, heavily accented voice fractured the icy shell of worthlessness Kyle had built around her heart. The Maybach pulled into the secure subterranean garage of the St. Regis Chicago, one of the most exclusive and heavily guarded residential skyscrapers in the city. Lorenzo escorted her onto a private elevator that shot up to the penthouse level. When the steel doors parted, Madeline stepped into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling glass Italian marble and breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. Waiting in the expansive living room was an older man holding a black medical bag. Lorenzo introduced him simply as Dr. Harrison, a former chief of surgery at Rush University Medical Center, who now worked exclusively on the Moretti payroll. The doctor was efficient and impeccably polite, treating Madeline with the utmost respect as he examined the dark, ugly bruises blooming across her arms and the nasty scrape on her thigh where Kyle had kicked her. As the doctor applied a soothing, medicated ointment to her leg, the heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse opened. Matteo strode into the room, his suit damp from the storm. He carried a heavy olive-green military duffel bag, dropping it onto the glass coffee table with a loud, weighted thud. The zipper was partially open, revealing thick, banded stacks of $100 bills. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Explain." "Found it hidden inside the primary HVAC duct in the ceiling of her bedroom," Matteo reported, grimly shooting a sympathetic glance at Madeline. "There is nearly $3 million in laundered cash in there, boss. I ran the serial numbers on the bands. This is Irish money. Liam O'Connor's money." Madeline's blood ran cold. The room began to spin violently. "What?" she gasped, her hands trembling as she clutched Lorenzo's borrowed jacket tighter around her chest. I don't understand. I don't know what that is. I swear I didn't know that was in my apartment." Lorenzo held up a hand, silencing the room. He stepped toward the sofa, sitting directly beside Madeline, and gently took her cold hands in his warm ones. His intense gaze anchored her racing, terrified mind. "I know you did not to Soro," Lorenzo said smoothly, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Kyle was not just a pathetic, abusive drunk. He was a thief playing a very dangerous game. He stole from the O'Connor Syndicate, the most ruthless Irish crew on the South Side. He knew they would tear his life apart looking for this money, so he hid it in the one place they would never think to look. "My apartment," Madeline whispered, the horrifying realization crashing down on her like a physical weight. "Because my name is clean. Because I have no criminal record. He was using me." "Exactly." Lorenzo confirmed, his voice laced with a lethal, quiet fury directed entirely at the man he had left bleeding on her floor. "If Kyle had succeeded tonight, he would have put a bullet in your head, retrieved this duffel bag from the ceiling, and disappeared across the border into Mexico. But even if you had somehow escaped him, Liam O'Connor's enforcers would have eventually tracked Kyle's movements to your building. They would have kicked down your door, and they would not have asked polite questions. They would have tortured you to death, believing you were an accomplice." Madeline pressed her hands over her face, a shattered sob tearing from her throat. Her entire life for the past 2 years had been an elaborate, terrifying lie. Kyle had not only systematically broken her spirit and mocked her generous body to keep her weak and compliant, but he had also actively positioned her as a disposable shield against a violent cartel. She felt impossibly stupid, deeply humiliated, and utterly broken. "Hey!" Lorenzo whispered fiercely. He reached up his large, capable hands, gently wrapping around her thick wrists, pulling her hands away from her tear-stained face. He leaned in close, his face mere inches from hers, radiating an overwhelming protective heat. "Do not cry for that worthless piece of filth. You are alive. You survived him. That takes incredible strength, Madeline." "I am not strong." Madeline wept bitterly, her shoulders shaking. "Look at me, Lorenzo. I am a mess. I am heavy. I am foolish, and I let him destroy my life." "Stop!" Lorenzo ordered, his voice dropping an octave raw and vibrating with undeniable passion. He framed her plush, tear-streaked face with his hands, his thumbs sweeping across her cheekbones. "You will never speak of yourself that way in my presence again. You are not a mess. You are the most breathtaking, magnificent woman I have ever laid eyes on. Your curves, your softness, your beautiful, generous body, they are a blessing, not a flaw. Kyle was a weak, pathetic boy who tried to break a goddess because he knew he was entirely unworthy of her." Madeline stared into his dark storm cloud eyes, completely paralyzed by the raw, unfiltered truth burning within them. Lorenzo was not placating her. He meant every single word. For the first time in her adult life, a man was looking at her full, plus-sized figure, not as something to be tolerated or hidden, but as something to be violently protected and fiercely worshipped. Lorenzo leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her full-parted lips. "Kyle is currently bleeding out in my warehouse. By dawn, he will be feeding the fish at the bottom of Lake Michigan. As for Liam O'Connor, I will return his stolen money with a clear message. Elm Street belongs to me, and Madeline Hayes is permanently under the protection of the Moretti family. Anyone who even breathes your name with ill intent will answer to my gun." He paused, the heavy silence of the luxurious penthouse amplifying the tension crackling between them. "I am a dangerous man, Madeline," Lorenzo confessed quietly, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight to her core. "My world is steeped in blood and shadow. I can give you $500,000 right now, put you on a private jet to Paris or Rome, and give you a beautiful, quiet life, far away from the monsters of Chicago. Or, Lorenzo's voice dropped to a husky, possessive whisper, or you can stay here, with me, at my side, where I can spend the rest of my life worshipping every beautiful inch of you, showing you exactly how a real king treats his queen. Madeline's heart hammered against her ribs, no longer beating in terror, but in absolute, exhilarating anticipation. The choice was staggering. She could run toward safety, anonymity, and a quiet, lonely existence, or she could step into the glittering, dangerous darkness with a man who looked at her as if she hung the stars in the sky. She felt the lingering warmth of his large hands on her skin, the solid, unyielding promise of his protection, and the burning fire of his undeniable attraction. Madeline took a deep, steadying breath. She reached up, placing her soft, plump hand over Lorenzo's calloused one, pressing his palm firmly against her cheek. She did not want to hide in the shadows anymore. She wanted the fire. "I don't know anything about Paris." Madeline whispered, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her tears, illuminating her beautiful face. She leaned forward, closing the microscopic distance between them, feeling his ragged breath against her lips. "I think I would much rather stay in Chicago." Lorenzo let out a low, victorious groan. He crashed his lips against hers, pulling her lush, heavy body firmly into his lap, sealing her choice, her safety, and her terrifyingly beautiful new future with a kiss that tasted of whiskey rain and absolute, unbreakable devotion. Did this gripping Mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved Madeline and Lorenzo's unexpected, thrilling love story, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow romance readers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic, heart-pounding tale. Drop a comment below, telling us your favorite plot twist today. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.